I watched it happen from the far end of the boardroom, the kind of scene that makes your stomach turn even when it's not your badge on the table. Derek Hoyt, 2 weeks into his reign as CEO and already puffed up like a Macy's balloon, dropped the access report in front of Grant like it was a parking ticket. "You don't need board access anymore," he said, all smug and sugar-free. "No thank you. No discussion. Just that cold, clipped corporate tone that says, 'I've already decided you're irrelevant.'" Grant didn't flinch. No protest, no grand speech. He just looked at the badge, then at Derek, and nodded like someone hearing a weather report. And then he stood. Not a sound in the room, not a cleared throat, not a rustled page. He adjusted the cuff of that brown herringbone jacket he always wore like it was armor passed down from a better time. Probably was. Walked to his office. I followed him without moving. Not physically, I sat frozen like everyone else, but in that silent, invisible way you trail someone when your gut knows this ain't just a walkout. I watched him disappear down the hall, already half a ghost. At his desk, he pulled open the top right drawer, the one with the busted rail. We all knew it jammed. Grant never got it fixed because, in his words, sometimes sticking points keep you honest. He reached in, pulled out a thick envelope sealed with a brass clasp, gave it one long look, then tucked it under his arm. That was it. He left everything else. Notes, reports, the Mont Blanc pen the founder gave him in '07, just walked out. And here's where I pause this story real quick. If you're even half invested in what happens next, hit subscribe and like this video. It helps us more than you know, and honestly, it keeps this kind of storytelling going. You wouldn't believe how many people listen without subscribing. All right, back to it. By the time Derek strutted into the next investor call with his stupid espresso martini grin, the damage had already begun. I knew it. You could feel the gravity shift. Something had been severed, not just dismissed. You don't cut off the roots and expect the tree to stay upright. But Derek? He was too high on buzzwords to notice the sap bleeding from the bark. "We're going agile," he chirped. "Streamlined, reinvented leadership." Someone even clapped. I wanted to vomit. See, what Derek never understood, and probably still doesn't, is that Grant wasn't just a nameplate on the conference table. He was the table. The guy who sat silent for 88% of meetings but would mutter a single sentence that rerouted entire budgets. I once saw him kill $1 million acquisition with a shrug. He didn't posture. He didn't preen. He understood. Which, of course, made him the enemy of every freshly minted exec who thought disruption was a job title. Later that afternoon, I checked in on his office. Empty. Lights still on. Chair slightly pulled out. The room smelled like pencil lead and dry erase markers. Quiet authority. I saw the gap in the drawer where the envelope had been. I didn't know what was in it yet, but I felt it in my spine. It wasn't for us. It wasn't a goodbye letter or a swan song. It was a fuse. And Derek? He'd just lit the match. By Thursday, Derek had us rebranded like a startup on Red Bull. The company LinkedIn page went from sober navy headers to neon gradients and emojis. We weren't restructuring operations anymore. We were reimagining future-proof excellence at scale. I saw a press release hit Business Wire with a quote attributed to Derek that used the word synergistically 3 times in 12 words. That man could turn a balance sheet into a BuzzFeed quiz. Photo shoots started in the break room. He brought in a photographer, his old roommate from Cornell apparently, to follow him around like some tech messiah. Suddenly, every intern was a culture ambassador, and Derek had a whole slide on social resonance metrics during the executive huddle. He even tried to get us to record reaction videos during earnings week. "The market wants relatability," he said. Like relatability would fix our operational debt ratio. Nobody said anything, not out loud, but you could feel it. The sideways glances during meetings, the forced nods, the CFO's jaw clenching just a little too long during Derek's monologues about disruption culture. It wasn't just change, it was theater. Legacy wasn't being updated, it was being paper shredded and replaced with filters and hashtags. And through it all, Grant said nothing. Because Grant wasn't here anymore. But he was watching. I know because I saw him once on the 3rd floor parking structure. I was leaving late, maybe 7:15, dragging my laptop bag and a reheated burrito in my purse. He was just sitting in his car, engine off, windows down, staring out at the building like it had personally betrayed him. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and didn't care. I wanted to say something. But what do you say to the man whose absence makes the walls feel thinner? And then, a week later, things started to get weird. Compliance emails from the bank marked urgent, language that sounded a little too careful. The controller mentioned delays in outgoing payments. Unexpected verification protocols was how she put it. One of the analysts flagged a query from an insurance rep asking for updated leadership guarantee documentation. Derek brushed it off. Growing pains, he said, sipping from a branded hydro flask someone in marketing made with Next Gen stenciled on the side. But that wasn't just noise. It was the system coughing. And Grant? He wasn't coughing. He was dialing. Somewhere in a quiet room, maybe his study, maybe a coffee shop with wood paneling and jazz humming low, Grant opened his phone, scrolled past contacts with names like Harlan, Legal, and Vanessa, board chair, and tapped the one that simply read, Martin, BRC Risk Oversight. No title, no emoji, just that name. He didn't call. Not yet. Just updated the contact info. New number. Maybe added a note. But it was the act that mattered. Grant never moved quickly. He didn't need to. He planted seeds, watered them, waited for the weather. Meanwhile, Derek was too busy rehearsing for his next fireside chat to notice the smoke behind him. I kept thinking back to that envelope, the one Grant pulled from his drawer. Thick enough to hold legal papers, heavy enough to matter. It wasn't labeled, wasn't marked urgent, but it had a weight to it that made my bones itch. Derek had booted a man who never raised his voice, never took up space, but who had kept this company stitched together when everything else was falling apart. And now, that stitch had been cut. Derek thought he'd amputated dead weight. He didn't realize he'd just severed the artery. 16 months before Derek Hoyt ever stepped foot into our glassy monument of a headquarters, the company was bleeding out behind the scenes. Not that you'd have known it from the outside. Press releases chirped about strategic realignments and targeted innovation. But internally, we were 3 weeks from missing payroll and 5 from tripping a covenant that would have triggered a chain reaction none of us were positioned to survive. The liquidity crisis wasn't a fire. It was a slow, invisible flood creeping under the door. Vendors stopped offering net 60 terms. A lead investor ghosted after due diligence. The CFO back then, Preston, the cautious one with the perma-gray tie, had called it manageable instability right before resigning and citing health concerns. Everyone else scrambled. Everyone except Grant. He didn't panic. He didn't even change his lunch routine. Just asked for one folder, took 2 meetings, both off-site, and came back with a single manila envelope. No parade, no announcement. Just left it on the founder's desk with a yellow sticky note. Resolved. Let's not do this again. What none of us knew, except maybe the GC and one senior banker, was what that envelope actually held. It was a side agreement. Quietly inked between Grant and BRC Bank, the same institution that had underwritten our bridge capital for years. When no one else would vouch for us, when the founders' shares were overleveraged and the remaining board members were too exposed, Grant had done something unthinkable. He signed a personal guarantee. $480 million. Of course, it wasn't unconditional. Grant wasn't a fool. There was a clause near the end, buried under the legal frost, in a section marked Continuity Terms. It read like this: Guarantor's obligation is contingent upon their ongoing service as a voting member of the board of directors, with full access and fiduciary authority. That sentence, 33 words long, was the invisible thread holding the entire $480 million capital restructure in place. It wasn't just a footnote. It was the spine of the deal. Grant never bragged about it. He didn't want a bonus. No one ever printed his name on the recap deck that saved us from collapse. That was his style. Quiet pride. Private fires put out without making anyone feel the heat. He saved the company, then went back to proofreading the next quarter's minutes with a red pen that had no cap. And now, that agreement was still active, still enforceable, still binding. But Grant was gone. And no one on the current executive team, not Derek, not the new CFO, not the fresh out of McKinsey chief strategy officer, had the faintest clue it existed. Because it wasn't in the board packet. It wasn't logged in the standard compliance folders. The original copy was held at BRC in a climate-controlled vault, and the only other version lived in Grant's personal records. likely the envelope he pulled from his drawer the day Derek revoked his access. That document was a time bomb, the worst kind too, silent, legal, ticking under layers of ignorance and ego. I don't think Grant viewed it as leverage, not originally. He wasn't that type of man. When he signed it, it was out of duty, not ambition. A quiet promise to keep things stitched together when the rest of us were out of thread. But Derek didn't understand that. He thought leadership was about noise. Grant knew better. He didn't need to raise his voice. He just had to wait for the moment when silence would say it all. By week 5 of Derek's transformation era, things started wobbling under the glitter. Not loud, not headline-worthy, just off. Accounts payable flagged a 3-day lag in outgoing vendor payments. Treasury said the bank's auto clearance protocol had tightened, but couldn't explain why. Compliance got pinged about missing updates to key person disclosures, which was odd since those rarely moved unless someone flagged a board event. And then came the audit prep call, unscheduled, unprompted, and unreasonably specific. It came from BRC's internal risk team, and they weren't asking generic year-end questions. They wanted resolution documentation, personal guarantee alignment, board credentialing updates. It wasn't routine, it was targeted. The CFO, Alana Green, sharp, composed, never wasted a word, raised an eyebrow in our Thursday finance roundtable. Has something changed in our risk profile? She asked, slow and low. The GC, Vincent Cho, chimed in right after. We haven't restructured any guarantees since last year. This feels misaligned. Derek, of course, laughed it off. We're too big to shake. The bank's just slow to catch up with how fast we're moving. He said that with his feet on the conference table and a half-eaten protein bar in his hand. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. None of us did, because Derek wasn't listening. He never really did. He performed leadership the way a community theater kid performs Hamlet, loudly, with lots of squinting and pauses that meant nothing. What he didn't know, and what I was starting to suspect, was that he hadn't just disrupted a leadership style. He'd yanked the keystone out of a structure he didn't understand. Grant's name hadn't come up yet, not formally, but whispers were building. A quiet hallway exchange with our payroll lead, who casually mentioned something weird with the drawdown protocols. A closed-door meeting between the GC and a representative from BRC's compliance liaison team. Vincent didn't say anything afterward, but his silence carried weight. And then there was the founder's longtime assistant, Rosa, who I hadn't heard from in months, slipping me a message outside the elevator. "Do you think Grant knew this would happen?" she asked, eyes scanning for cameras, voice just above a whisper. "I think Grant knows more than he says," I replied. She just nodded. They never should have pushed him. That night, I got an email from a burner address I almost deleted, thinking it was spam. Subject line, "Sincerely, the furniture." Inside, one line. They have no idea what you signed, do they? There was no signature, no greeting, but I knew exactly who sent it. The phrasing was Grant's, dry, razor-clean, and surgical in its implications. He always joked that longtime board members weren't leaders, they were furniture with a vote. It was the kind of self-deprecating thing he'd say just before saving the company for the 5th time that year. I stared at the email for 15 minutes. Then I forwarded it to myself, twice, under different subject lines, just in case someone decided to pull our inboxes in the coming weeks, because the walls were tightening now. You could feel it. Vendor calls started getting weird. Requests for payment updates, contract confirmations. Our line of credit showed a status review tab in the Treasury dashboard that hadn't been there before. And yet, Derek kept charging ahead, setting up Next Gen Vision Day, where he planned to live stream his 5-year roadmap from the office rooftop. Meanwhile, in rooms far from his spotlight, the people who understood the plumbing were getting nervous. Grant, wherever he was, wasn't nervous. He was patient. And patience in his hands was never passive. It was loaded, waiting, watching the stage collapse plank by plank, knowing he'd already pulled the nail that held it all together. At 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday no one will forget, Treasury's main line lit up red. Sasha, our Treasury lead, calm, seasoned, the kind of woman who once processed a 40-mailer fund movement while eating soup, answered like it was any other compliance query, but after 8 seconds, her posture changed. She sat up straighter, grabbed a pen, and stopped slurping. I watched her face morph, First confusion, then alarm. She asked for the caller's name again, wrote it down slower this time, then quietly said, "Hold, please," and covered the receiver. Her eyes swept across the room until they locked on me. "We need Alana," she said. 5 minutes later, Alana, Vincent, and Sasha were on speakerphone with BRC's risk officer, a man named Daniel Fried who did not sound like someone calling to confirm fax numbers. "I'm going to be very clear here," he said, voice like ice on granite. "As of this morning, BRC has frozen all further drawdowns from your primary credit line pending immediate review." Alana blinked. "On what basis?" "On the basis that the named personal guarantor tied to the 2023 restructuring agreement, Grant Lyle, is no longer listed as an active board member. We've requested clarification. That request has gone unanswered for 11 business days. This is a risk flag under Section 3B. I felt the room tilt. Vincent leaned in. "Just to confirm, you're saying the personal guarantee is conditional upon board service?" "I'm not saying that," Fried replied. "The clause says it. Page 37, paragraph 2. Guarantee contingent upon ongoing, uninterrupted board participation." His removal triggered a material condition change. Sasha clicked her pen 3 times. No one stopped her. "Is this reversible?" Alana asked, already knowing the answer. Fried hesitated, then said flatly, "Not without reinstatement and reaffirmation, or, barring that, a full renegotiation under new terms, which, I should warn you, would come with a recalibrated rate based on current exposure, and your market profile has shifted." That last word, shifted, hung in the air like a loaded gun on a dinner table. I left the room before Derek arrived, but not before I heard Alana say, "Get him in here, now." Word spread fast. The kind of fast you only see when something really goes wrong. Half the finance team started printing. Legal started deleting. The marketing lead walked out of the bathroom with her phone still playing Derek's latest rooftop video, him talking about agility in adversity with a drone panning behind him. I made it to my desk right as Derek came in, still smiling from whatever ego juice he'd been chugging all morning, until he saw the cluster outside Treasury, until he saw Alana's face, and Vincent's. "What?" he asked, laughing like the punchline was just late. Vincent looked up from his notes, deadpan. "Do you know who Grant Lyle was to the bank?" Derek frowned. "He was a board advisor. Dead weight. What does that—" Vincent stood, slow. "He was the personal guarantor on our restructuring facility. You just triggered a default clause." Derek's face went white, visibly, his neck first, then his jaw. "What? Clause?" "Guarantee required active board participation. That's over now. So's our draw access." Derek stammered. "We've got cash, right? In operating?" "For a few weeks," Sasha said, not looking up. "Then we're fine." "No," Alana said, "we're not." For the first time, his voice cracked. "But how was I supposed to know that? No one said—" "You didn't ask," Vincent replied. That stopped him. For once, no smug retort, no buzzword deflection. Just silence, the kind that strips a room bare. By noon, our vendors had started calling. Our insurance carrier sent a request for leadership validation. 2 investors asked for emergency clarity. And somewhere, probably in a brownstone library or under a quiet oak, Grant was reading the headlines like morning scripture. He didn't need to say a word. He already had. 16 months ago. Page 37, paragraph 2. He didn't write it to punish us. But the moment Derek erased him, the paper rewrote our future. By 1:43 p.m., Derek's calendar had cleared itself. The all-hands alignment call? Cancelled. His fireside chat for LinkedIn Live? Postponed. That private strategy session with the new VP of brand? Vanished like smoke. Instead, he was standing alone in his glass office, staring at the blinking red light on the conference phone. It had just gone dead. The call had lasted less than 4 minutes. The founder, yes, that founder, Thomas Reed, had dialed in from retirement. Man hadn't been seen in 3 fiscal years, hadn't shown up to his own portrait unveiling. But when BRC froze our lifeline and the press started whispering about liquidity risk, Thomas's name resurfaced like a biblical curse, and the only thing he said, according to someone close enough to hear, "What did you do to Grant?" No shouting. No greetings, just that question. Ice cold. Derek had tried to explain. Something about new leadership vision, fresh alignment, and board restructuring for modern agility. Thomas didn't let him finish. You removed the one man whose name mattered to the bank. Do you understand what you've done? Derek stammered something about lack of transparency, trying to pivot into a word salad. Thomas replied with the softest words in his arsenal. You just made my name irrelevant. I suggest you fix it before the market opens tomorrow. Click. No goodbye. That afternoon, the building changed. Investors started poking around, not with PR-approved emails, but with back-channel pings, the kind that don't ask questions, they just arrive. Asking for call times, PDF copies of governance changes, explanations of inconsistencies between previous risk disclosures and recent personnel shifts. One investor even contacted me directly through my personal LinkedIn, just 4 words. Did Derek really fire Grant? The tension became physical. Air got heavier, people walked quieter, legal ran hotter, and Derek? He finally looked scared. Not performative, not rattled, scared. Because once the founder breaks radio silence, it's no longer about managing perception, it's about survival. Meanwhile, 20 blocks away, Grant Lyle sat on a park bench beneath a sycamore, one leg crossed over the other, sipping from a stainless steel thermos like nothing in the world could touch him. He had a printed copy of the Financial Ledger Weekly folded neatly across his lap, headline circled in red, Restructuring Deal on Ice, Internal Shakeup Triggers. Credit freeze at Halston Group. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. Just turned the page. Then his phone buzzed. It was a number he knew. The attorney who'd handled the BRC agreement back when things were unraveling the first time, Laura Templeton. No small talk. They're scrambling, she said. The board wants to undo the vote, reinstate you, full access. Derek's being advised to take a leave. Grant waited. Let silence speak. Laura finally asked, Do you want to know your terms? He sipped again. No, I want to know their terms. She laughed, nervous. They're willing to match your previous equity comp, add emeritus voting power, and issue a public acknowledgement. Grant didn't answer. He just stood up, folded the paper, and tucked it under his arm. Tell them I'll think about it. Laura exhaled. You always make them come to you. That's the only way they learn, he replied, and ended the call. By sunset, Derek's office lights were still on. No one had seen him leave. Rumor was the chairman had called for a closed-door session at 8:00 a.m. sharp. I don't know what Grant did that night. Maybe he went home and played chess against himself. Maybe he poured a bourbon and listened to vinyl like nothing ever happened. But I do know this. For the first time since he left the boardroom, Grant wasn't waiting anymore. He was deciding. They didn't summon him. They requested. Carefully. Respectfully. It started with an official email from the chairman's office. No CCs, no assistants, just a direct note sent at 6:12 a.m. Subject line, private conversation. Inside, 3 lines. We would appreciate a moment of your time. Your voice, your presence, your judgment, they're missed. That was followed within the hour by a call from Vincent, the general counsel. No small talk, just a quiet, humbled tone. They're ready to listen, Grant. All of them. By noon, the boardroom, once the setting of his erasure, had been scrubbed of ego. No Derek, no cameras, no coffee-stained buzzword decks. Just 10 people who looked like they'd aged a decade in a week, seated around a table that suddenly felt too big, too exposed. Grant walked in precisely on time. Not early, not late. He wore the same jacket they'd seen on his last day. No briefcase, just a slim leather folio under his arm. He sat. Didn't speak. Waited. The chairman cleared his throat. First, let me say, on behalf of everyone here, this was a mistake. No one interrupted. Even the usually smug strategy VP kept his mouth shut, his neck blotchy red. We allowed optics to outweigh substance. You are essential to our standing. The board is prepared to offer immediate reinstatement, full voting authority. We'd like to publicly acknowledge your contribution to the 2023 restructuring and, if you're willing, have you join our earnings call next week to restore investor confidence. Grant didn't blink. We've also discussed a long-term board leadership role, a seat with final veto authority over governance decisions tied to any executive reorgs. You'd be our senior-most director. They waited. No one breathed too loud. He finally looked up. "I'll think about it." Just that. Not smug, not performative, just principled, controlled, measured, like someone who understood his value long before they'd remembered it. They nodded, murmured thanks, tried not to show their relief. Then, as he stood to leave, he placed a single sheet of paper in front of Vincent. The leather folio never even opened. It was a printed PDF, 1 page. The document looked aged, creased only once. On it, highlighted in yellow, were 33 words. Guarantor's obligation is contingent upon their ongoing service as a voting member of the board of directors, with full access and fiduciary authority. No signature needed. It was already signed, dated, time-stamped, legally binding. Vincent stared at it like it was radioactive. Grant tapped the paper once, gently. "This isn't about recognition. It never was." The strategy VP tried to recover. We understand, but if you rejoin, we can..." Grant turned slowly. "You don't understand. You're reacting. That's the difference." Then he walked out. No folder, no speech, no applause, just the sound of chairs not moving, people not breathing, and a 33-word clause floating in the center of the room like a loaded verdict. They'd offered him everything, and he hadn't said yes. Derek unraveled fast. It started with the late-night Slack messages, pinging everyone from finance to legal with passive-aggressive questions that weren't really questions. When did Treasury become allergic to strategy? Is anyone in GC actually reading these agreements? Then came the stand-up meetings he forced every morning. 8 sharp, no exceptions. Half the staff started calling them sit-down beatings. When that didn't work, he started swinging. He fired the head of a treasury, Sasha, on a Thursday morning and framed it as necessary streamlining. Then 2 compliance leads, 1 VP in ops. By the time Friday came, he'd sent a dozen termination notices in 48 hours. People stopped looking him in the eye, and still, the problem refused to go away. The bank hadn't unfrozen the credit line. If anything, they'd hardened their position. Vendors started ghosting. One even posted a thinly veiled tweet. If a partner can't honor terms, they're not a partner. They're a headline waiting to happen. Worse, shareholder groups began organizing. Small ones at first, family funds, international co-investors, asking about clause triggers, emergency board meeting protocols, executive protections. But then 2 major institutional holders called for an urgent reconsideration of governance direction. Translation? They wanted a vote. Derek tried to control the narrative, leaked a memo to a media outlet about overreach by legacy lenders, suggesting the bank's concerns were outdated and borderline predatory. Bad move. BRC responded with 1 sentence. Reinstate the named guarantor, or we initiate debt acceleration per Section 8A. No ambiguity, no bluff. That meant they'd call the loan. All of it. $480 million due immediately. At that point, Derek wasn't the CEO. He was a placeholder, a ghost in an office no one wanted to enter. He still barked orders, still claimed he had new capital lined up. But everyone knew. You don't replace a collapsed foundation with optimism. You replace it with concrete, and Grant was the concrete. Meanwhile, Grant? He didn't call a press conference, didn't post a victory lap, didn't even answer most of the calls flooding his inbox. He just went about his day. Visited his niece's art show, picked up dry cleaning, ate lunch with an old colleague who used to sit on the audit committee. When asked about the situation, he only said, "I've learned that systems don't fail overnight. They fail quietly." One ignored clause at a time. A journalist tried to reach him for comment. His response was polite, brief. "I no longer speak on behalf of the company. Thank you for understanding." But internally, people were speaking. The board circulated the ultimatum. Vincent confirmed the clause. Alana backed it. Every director now had a printed copy of the guarantee agreement in front of them. Derek still didn't get it. He thought someone, anyone, would step in. Maybe Thomas Reed. Maybe a powerful investor. Maybe even Grant himself. But that's not how this worked. The storm didn't come with thunder. It came with a single clause, signed, activated, and now it was closing in. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 7:30 a.m., but by 7:05 every seat was taken. No coffee, no small talk. just silence. The kind of silence that feels like a courtroom before the verdict. Derek sat at the far end, not in his usual power seat. No assistants, no laptop, just a glass of water he hadn't touched. His suit looked like it hadn't been pressed, eyes sunken, one hand twitching against the table. The chairman arrived last, carrying a single sheet of paper, Grant's PDF, no folder, no preamble. He sat, glanced at no one, then began reading. Guarantor's obligation is contingent upon their ongoing service as a voting member of the board of the directors, with full access and fiduciary authority. A pause. That clause, he said, looking down the table, has triggered a $480 million acceleration demand. As of this morning, our credit is locked. Our vendors are stalling. Our coverage is under review. And this board has been summoned not to discuss it, but to decide what happens next. He turned to Derek. Mr. Hoyt, you were briefed by General Counsel. You were warned by Treasury. You ignored protocol. So now one question remains. He picked up the page, tapped it once, and leaned in. Why did you remove the only person keeping us solvent? Derek opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I believed we needed to modernize, fresh leadership. He seemed disengaged. Vincent cut him off. He signed the personal guarantee, not you, not any of us. Him. The chairman turned back to the room. Is there any director willing to support Mr. Hoyt's continued leadership? Silence. Not even the strategy VP, Derek's golden boy, spoke. He just kept his eyes on the table. The vote was immediate, unanimous. Derek was removed as CEO, effective immediately. Legal would handle the paperwork. Security would handle the rest. And just like that, the man who removed a legacy director to make room for vision was escorted out through the back hallway, carrying nothing but his phone and a face full of disbelief. When the door clicked shut behind him, the chairman sighed once and looked across the table. Next item, discussion of Grant Lyle's reinstatement. Is he willing? Vincent pulled out his phone. He already responded this morning. I'll read his statement. He unlocked the screen, opened a brief email, and read, I appreciate the offer, and I'm grateful for the acknowledgement, but I've accepted a new board seat, effective today with Solon Capital. Half the room blinked. Solon Capital, our largest competitor. The chairman didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly. I suppose that settles it. No one spoke for a long while. The weight of it hung like lead. Not just the loss, not just the shame, but the echo of what had been discarded so casually. Grant had never needed recognition. He'd never needed headlines. He needed one thing, to be heard before he was dismissed. And when they failed to listen, the documents did the talking. Far from the boardroom, in a quiet office with no glass walls or spotlights, Grant folded his phone shut and sipped his coffee. No grin, no gloat, just peace. He glanced once out the window, then turned back to his notes. A final thought, private but definitive. I didn't need the badge, just the silence that followed.